Happy Thursday, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This morning, we've been talking about, I can't believe it, the 5-year anniversary of Hurricane Florence.
5 years ago at this time of the year was a much different story. That it was about a week prior to this point that we were looking at Florence, because Florence had the potential of moving into the Carolinas. It was a powerful Category 4 at one point. It weakened to a Category 1, but then Florence slowed down, as we've seen for so many systems. And when a tropical system like that slows down, then you're talking about the flooding.
It was one of the storms that came off the coast of Africa, which quite often the most intense hurricanes move from Africa. And here you go, this video. Just a monster storm that made landfall. It was really impacted the Carolinas tremendously, especially North Carolina. Chris and I were here. It seemed like we were here days covering this.
Yeah, I was on nights then, and you guys were working mornings and nights and doubles, and you had your cot out back.
No cot. That was on the floor right
I was about to say, right in the weather center. Oh my goodness. Okay, obviously, guys, I wasn't here for this, but this video is just
flooding was amazing. About 30 inches of rain, if you can imagine that.
And this is actually the most rain that's ever come from a tropical system in the history of the Carolinas. And this isn't just the coast. That it was as far west as Ludington.
Yes.
And we had, oh my goodness, it was an absolute historic flooding. And highways were underwater. And
a lot of the highways, Interstate 95 had to be closed down.
Completely shut
right
down.
There at Lumberton, because so much, highways are closed down. Impact. Every school was canceled. All the colleges, most of the colleges in North Carolina had to cancel classes because it came very much inland. Didn't make it to Charlotte, but as you were saying, over towards areas around Wadesboro, Rockingham, and all the way to the Carolina coastline.
How does this compare when you look back out of all your years here? I mean, I know earlier this morning you talked about Hugo.
Well, you think about Hurricane Floyd in 1999, Matthew in 2016, obviously Hurricane Hugo. Then if you want to go really historically, Hurricane Hazel. But yeah, it's one of those. And this was more than just a wind. It was the amount of rainfall that we got. That's what we're covering. And Chris, you mentioned something that I had never seen before. It was a flood emergency. Remember that?
Oh, it was crazy. So there's flash flooding, and then there's flash flood emergency. And then at that point, they're saying is almost a curfew. You're not supposed to go out. You're not supposed to dry out, because the water was rising so quickly. The amount of streams that we have around here is absolutely devastating when you have that much rain. It was Chesterfield County and it was Union County for the first time in their history that they had a flash flood emergency. Yeah, exactly. North Carolina. So it was in that section, and that's when Florence was moving across. So we're just really commemorating this day 5 years ago that it made landfall, but it really wasn't until the 15th and 16th for our area that we had the worst impacts.
Joy chiming in saying her nephews were out of school for a week in the Fayetteville area. But what's crazy to me, you talked this morning about this being Category 1. We think about Category 5 causing all the damage, but really, when it slowed down, it was the rain that was such an issue.
It made landfall with 90-mile-an-hour winds, strong Category 1, but it was the amount of rainfall. Let's take a look. This is a picture from the International Space Station. We go to Weather 2.
Wow, it's a monster.
That is a look at the eye. It was a huge eye, about a 95-mile wide eye of the storm. So this, and covered so much area, it almost covered, if you could think of that, putting that down in the state of North Carolina, the entire state.
I remember actually in 2018 making a graphic where we actually took that, measured it. It pretty much was the size of the Carolinas completely.
You can imagine that's a hurricane that covered the entire state if you put it on top of it.
Weather is and not amazing, obviously, in a good way. Amazing in just like how awestruck when you kind of put that kind of context to this, because anybody can look at this and like, wow, that looks terrifying, it looks menacing. But when you talk about the real context about how massive this is, especially when it comes to what y'all do, I could never with meteorology, because I don't know how you track this, especially with when it came. You said even though it made landfall today, the devastation was really the rain. So how did you guys, if you guys could take me back 5 years ago, what was it like? What were you doing? Well,
I think for us, we were covering what was going on somewhere else. We were not covering what's happening here, which was good for us. It wasn't like a devastating situation here. We were covering what was happening. We had reporters all over eastern North Carolina that were right in the middle of this. So
I believe it.
We had the advantage of having reporters on the scene giving us, almost play-by-play what was going on at that time.
I would say it was probably about 5 days out that we kind of hit the ground running, that we were on 12-hour shifts because we realized the magnitude of the situation. But speaking freely about Charlotte, it really wasn't until the last day that we realized this thing isn't going to be like a Hugo that it's in and out. This is going to slow down. And one of the biggest things that's been happening in the tropics recently is, yes, we're seeing more storms. Yes, they're getting more powerful, but they're getting slower. In 2017, you had Harvey. Harvey was a Category 4. But we remember Harvey for the amount of rain that Houston had. Dorian, for example, Hurricane Dorian in 2019 was a monster, but it sat in place for 14 hours over the Bahamas. And then meanwhile, in between that, you had Florence that slowed down a snail's pace. Larry, I think at one point it was moving less than 5 miles per hour for several hours.
And compare that to Hurricane Hugo. When Hurricane Hugo got to Charlotte, September 22nd, 1989, it was moving at about 20 to 25 to 30 miles per hour moving
That's
north.
fast.
That's very fast. And so that, that moved through, and that was not rain, that was wind. The damage from Hugo was all wind. Florence was the amount of rain. It was 30 inches of rainfall over parts of the state.
Like that's.
It just takes a long. Well, that's why they had to close the schools down, and the flood. It was a flood emergency because it had nowhere to go.
Right.
So it just built up, inch after inch after inch, and it took like weeks for that to finally clear out.
And some areas, realistically, we're still repairing some of the infrastructure from the roads for years. And so the areas are just recovering. And then let me see, it was New Bern, I believe, and
Little Washington, New Bern,
Jacksonville, not Florida, Jacksonville, North Carolina. Those areas were underwater because it's really a trifecta that hurricanes bring. It's the winds, the storm surge, and the rain. And just since this covered, it was the size of North Carolina, South Carolina combined, it just was moving on that northern tier that had so much rain that was incredible. But I want to show you the path of Florence. So Florence, as Larry mentioned, it came off Africa. And also, Florence was very unique because the latitude that it reached, usually it curves back out to sea. This is the first time it's ever done a straight beeline. Once it goes to that point, usually curves up. It made this weird path. So it was September 11th that it was a Category 4. It reached its peak at 150 miles per hour, a low of 937. This thing was a monster because 157 is Category 5. So it was very close to that. So at first, at this point, September 11th, we're like, wow, this is a Category 4. This potentially could be making landfall as a major hurricane. Well, then it weakened. It made landfall on September 14th, but this is the perspective I want to put it in. Notice September 14th, it makes landfall. September 17th, it's around Richmond, Virginia. So look at that little path. It dove down to the south. The heaviest rain was to the north. That's why we had such bad flooding through the parts of Chesterfield County over to Union County, because it just dragged across the state.
You don't see a hurricane moving like that, moving inland and then going southwest and then going north again. That just doesn't happen.
How does that kind of situation get created? I know for a lot of us that don't understand wind patterns and those kind of things on the sciencey end.
Atmospherics is where the areas of there was a big area of high pressure just northeast of there that really pushed it down. I mean, it was that flow. So it's the atmospherics in it.
Since I do traffic as well, this actually is a perfect comparison. It's just like the streets and traffic, because sometimes you can just have two lanes that are kind of blocked, and then everything gets stuck in place. Yeah. So you had one high pressure system, and you had another system off towards the west, and with those two, it slows down the flow, because the jet stream a lot of times can guide things. You can have fronts that push things in control. It was just kind of the perfect storm. This happened with Harvey, that it just didn't allow it to really move out. So it kind of was moving on its own. That's why it was wobbling and churning, and it wasn't until it got caught up in another system that it moved off towards the north. So that we've seen this a few times, and we're starting to see a lot more of these things. But then on top of that, the amount of rain that we saw here was also in the mountains. So there were some parts of the Carolinas that also saw 2018 rain records that compiled with this, over 100 inches of rain. Now, that didn't happen all at once, but also in the North Carolinas, the costliest hurricanes, you can see this perspective. Look where Florence ranks compared to all the rest.
Actually, the total on Florence was actually $24 billion.
$24 billion?
Okay. $24 billion.
Admittedly, I last updated this in 2019.
Yeah.
So, they reassessed it.
It's taken all these years, but total damage.
Wow, okay.
That's more than Floyd and Michael together.
Crazy.
Well, yeah, some of them down there were only in like single digits.
Yeah.
So.
And again, being Category 1, not even Category 4 or 5.
Oh, my goodness.
Keep commenting. We want to know, where were you 5 years ago? Were you here? Were you watching our weather team. You know, people have beach houses. It was a crazy time. So let us know where you were. And of course, we'll see you back here tomorrow on Wake Up Charlotte to Go and back on air at 11:30.
Have a blessed day.